I'm wedding and portrait photographer Vanessa, and I photograph hotels too. I do a lot of things. Thanks for being here. We're going to talk about shutter speed today. Thanks so much to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Shutter speed are one of the 3 main settings that you are going to utilize when setting up your camera's exposure. You also have something called shutter priority on your camera, which lets your shutter be the priority. Basically, you set your shutter speed and then all the other settings get set for you automatically around what you choose your shutter speed to be. So what is shutter speed? Shutter speed is how fast your shutter is open for. It's basically how long the camera is taking the picture for. So your camera takes a picture for a selected amount of time. You could take a picture for 6 hours if you want to, or 10 hours, or 10 seconds, or 1/10 of a second, or 1/100th of a second, and that's where you get those shutter speed values from. There's a lot of different reasons why shutter speed matters. First, if you're photographing something like kids or fast-moving objects, you're gonna wanna have a higher shutter speed. Now, you might automatically be thinking, I have a camera that has image stabilizer in it, so I don't really need to think about shutter speed. Nay, my friend. The image stabilization that is in your camera, like the Canon R5 that we are filming this with right now, that is to stabilize the camera. That's for your little movements, your heartbeat, your breathing, your camera shake. It's not for your subject's movement. You still need to control and freeze your subject's movement with your shutter speed. Of course, you could do it with flash, but we're not talking about that today. We're talking about shutter speed today. So just as a general rule of thumb about shutter speed when photographing fast-moving objects, let's say it's kids, you could probably be somewhere around 400th of a second, 500th of a second, and that's going to be a good spot there. If you're photographing something like race cars, you might want to push to 1/8000th of a second, which is typically the fastest most cameras can go on their shutter speed. Highly recommended for photographing something that fast. But if you're photographing something stationary, like, I don't know, this brush, and it's here and it's not moving and you're not really moving, then you could shoot it at maybe a 50th of a second or a 30th of a second, or maybe even a little bit less if you have image stabilization in your camera. Now, there is one thing I did not mention during all of this, which is extremely important to consider when choosing your shutter speed. In case you haven't already heard about today's video sponsor, Squarespace, let me tell you some of my favorite features. I've used Squarespace for a ton of different websites. My photography website, e-commerce website, selling photography education, and I've even designed my dad's band website. And it's all done in just a few clicks because Squarespace has really wonderful design templates for any type of style that you can imagine, and they're all clean, professional, and really easy to use. Now, if you're a photographer like I am and you are always on the go, updating your website tends to be the thing you put on the back burner. Well, with Squarespace's app, you can upload new photos to your website right from your mobile device, making sure that your photography work that is showcased is up to date at all times. Now, Squarespace isn't just about building a website. Yeah, it does that, and it's great. It also goes one step further into the workflow management of your business, including sending invoices, calendar scheduling, accepting payments, you name it, Squarespace probably does it. Now, if you head to the link in the description below, you're gonna get an extra 10% off. So make sure you take advantage of that. Try out Squarespace and see how easy it is to create a website, manage it, throw anything you want on there, and showcase your business as best as it can be. Now back to the video. Your shutter speed is also somewhat determined by the focal length of your lens. The general rule for that, people say always make sure that your shutter speed is as high or fast, the number of the shutter speed, matches your focal length. So if you're shooting with a 50mm lens, then make sure your shutter speed is at least 1/50th of a second. Because as you go longer on a lens, let's say you're shooting at 200, zoomed into 200 on the 70-200 lens, you see more camera shake, more movement from you. Again, even if the camera and the lens has image stabilization, it just doesn't hurt to have your shutter speed up if you can help it. You're just giving yourself safety. So if you have your lens that's around 200 millimeters, then make sure you're at least at 1/200th of a second. Now, personally, I like to double that. So if I'm shooting at 200, you better believe I want to be at like 1/500th of a second. If I have the 50 millimeter lens on, I'm probably going to want to be at 1/100th of a second. Of course, you know, I can make sure I'm really still and hold there and put my elbows on something and brace my camera in my hand and up to my eyeball and really hold still and trust my image stabilization, but call me crazy, I just move way faster than that, typically, on any given shoot. So this is all if you want to get your photos really in focus and really freeze the action and not have any motion blur at all. But truthfully, there is a place and a time for motion blur. Something like panning moving action so that your subject is in focus, but the background is blurry. Now, we're not going to get into different focus settings for these things. A lot of cameras have different focus settings that are better for moving objects and things like that. That's another video. Let's just talk about the shutter speed. You can also use slow shutter speed creatively. It's actually very popular right now in wedding photojournalistic type photos to have a higher f-stop but a lower shutter speed to create a little bit of kind of fun motion. You could also take a photo like this one where I froze the image with flash but had a low shutter speed, so that continuous light behind her let the dress have movement and her hair have movement to it. If you look at the Michael Anthony budget photography gear shootout series that I did, his photo was at a shutter speed that kind of froze the face of his wife while the dress had some movement in it. So you can take a look at that as well. So there's creative ways to use a slower, incorrect shutter speed that purposely creates movement in an image. I hope that's been helpful for you to learn all about shutter speed and how you can use it creatively or correctly or however you want in your next shoot. Make sure you hit like, subscribe, ring the bell here, and I will see you next time.